Bruce Lee was called out by Mike Tyson and said swing, 3 seconds later left him speechless. Bruce Lee vs. Mike Tyson, the showdown that shook the world. The gym was packed, the air heavy with the anticipation of thousands of spectators and cameras from around the world. Mike Tyson, then at the height of his career, with the heavyweight belt and a reputation for invincibility, had challenged Bruce Lee in a martial arts promotional event. It wasn't an official fight, at least, not on paper. But for Tyson, it was a matter of pride. He wanted to prove that boxing, the sweet science, was superior to any martial art. Bruce Lee, already a legend, accepted the challenge with a serene smile. He knew Tyson was a physical monster, but he also understood that true strength wasn't just in muscles. "You talk a lot, Mike. Let's see if your hands are as fast as your mouth," Lee said, adjusting his training gloves. Tyson laughed, a guttural, menacing sound. "I'll show you what pain is, Chinese. 3 seconds. That's how long you'll last." The referee gave the signal. The two positioned themselves, and the world held its breath. Tyson charged like a bull, his right fist already in motion, a direct punch that could knock down a wall. Bruce Lee, however, was not there when the coup arrived. He moved at an impossible angle, sliding to the side as if time had slowed down. His left foot spun, and his entire body became an arc of energy. "Swing," Lee said, almost in a whisper. And then it happened. Bruce Lee's side kick hit Tyson in the solar plexus with surgical precision. It wasn't a knockout blow, it was a paralyzing blow. The air escaped Tyson's lungs in a hoarse groan, his knees buckled, and he fell to his knees, eyes wide, mouth open in a futile attempt to breathe. 3 seconds. The gym erupted in screams, but Tyson barely heard them. He was fighting his own physiology, his diaphragm muscles locked, his brain panicking. Bruce Lee approached, not with arrogance, but with respect. "Brute strength is only part of the equation, Mike. The real art is knowing when not to hit." Tyson finally managed to catch his breath, panting, and looked up. There was no anger in them, just a sudden understanding. He had underestimated something he could not measure, the intelligence of the movement, the economy of violence, the philosophy behind combat. "Fuck," muttered Tyson, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything like it." Bruce Lee extended his hand. Tyson, after a moment of hesitation, accepted. There were no more provocations, no more challenges. Just the mutual recognition that, in that instant, the world had seen something beyond force. In the following years, Tyson never mocked martial arts again. And although they never faced each other again, the legend of that 3-second confrontation spread, proof that, in the end, true mastery lies not in winning, but in understanding. And so, without blood, without prolonged drama, the story ended. Not with a knockout, but with a lesson. The weight of silence. The following years were not kind to Mike Tyson. His defeat to Buster Douglas in 1990 shattered his aura of invincibility, and arrests, scandals and slow self-destruction dragged him into an abyss that not even his fists could breach. But amid the chaos, one memory persisted, those 3 seconds in Hong Kong, the moment when something inside him broke without a single blow being struck. He tried to bury the memory. After all, it was just training, a demonstration, nothing official. But the truth is that Tyson never looked at a martial artist the same way again. When MMA fighters began to dominate the scene in the 2000s, he watched them with a mix of fascination and resentment. "They don't know what it's like to get a real punch," he used to say. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. It was the fear that, somewhere, there was another Bruce Lee, someone who didn't need brute force to dismantle him. Meanwhile, the legend of the confrontation grew. Boxing coaches in Thailand and Japan cited the episode as proof that pure technique, when taken to the extreme, could overcome brute strength. In Wing Chun academies, the story was told as an example of Wu Wei, the art of winning without fighting. But for Tyson, it was just a shadow that haunted him, a reminder that no matter how much he dominated the ring, there was a whole world of fighting that he would never understand. In 2012, at age 46, Tyson stepped into the ring again in an exhibition fight against former heavyweight champion Corey Sanders. It wasn't a real fight, just a spectacle, a show for nostalgic fans. But when the gong sounded, something strange happened. Tyson hesitated. It wasn't fear of being beaten, it was something deeper, a reluctance he couldn't explain. In the first round, he danced, dodged, almost as if he was training with a ghost. In the second, when Sanders advanced, Tyson simply stopped. He didn't dodge, he didn't counterattack. He just stood there, motionless, as Sanders' punch hit him squarely. The audience booed. Commentators called it a pathetic end. But Tyson, lying on the ground, smiled. It wasn't defeat. It was relief. Years later, in an interview for a documentary about Bruce Lee, a reporter asked him if he still thought about that day in Hong Kong. "Of course I do," Tyson replied, lighting a cigar. "But not the way you think. It wasn't about him beating me. It was about him showing me that I didn't know shit. And the worst part? He didn't even have to hit me to do it." The reporter insisted, "Do you think you would have beaten Bruce Lee in a real fight?" Tyson took a long drag, exhaled slowly. "No. But I also don't think he would have won. Because a real fight wasn't what he wanted. He didn't fight to win. He fought to teach. And me? I only knew how to win. Until one day, I stopped." He never spoke about it again. But in his last public appearances, when young fighters came to him asking for advice, Tyson always said the same thing. Train to understand. Not to destroy. And so, the lesson that began with 3 seconds in a Hong Kong gym found its conclusion decades later, not with a knockout, not with a title, but with a man finally at peace with what he could not control. The weight of legacy. Years later, in a small dojo on the outskirts of Las Vegas, a young man named Rafael trained with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His master, a former kickboxing champion with scars on his knuckles, watched him silently, crossing his arms. Rafael didn't know, but that man had already been Mike Tyson's sparring partner in the 90s, and carried with him the same questions that haunted the former champion. "You just hit, Rafael. You don't fight," said the master, interrupting the training. Bruce Lee wasn't about strength. It was about flow. Tyson understood that too late. "What about you?" Rafael clenched his fists. "I want to be the best. Like Tyson was." The master laughed, a dry sound. Tyson was the best at destroying. But look at him now. A broken man, trying to teach what he never learned properly. He pointed to the wall, where a yellowed photo showed Tyson and Lee shaking hands, smiling as if they shared a secret. They respected each other because they knew they would never really face each other. "Do you respect someone like that?" Rafael didn't respond. That night, he broke into the dojo and stole the photo. He took it to his apartment, where he taped it to the wall above his bed as a reminder. But in the following days, something changed. Instead of training until he bled, he began observing the movements of other fighters. Instead of looking for the knockout, he started studying how his opponents breathed and how they moved before attacking. A month later, in the regional tournament, he won his first fight without throwing a single hard punch. He just dodged, counterattacked at the right time, and left his opponent exhausted. The master watched the fight on television. When Rafael returned to the dojo, he found him sitting on the mat, the photo of Tyson and Lee now in his hands. "You understand," said the master. "But be careful. Understanding is more dangerous than winning. Because now you know you can lose." Rafael didn't care. "For the first time, I felt that fighting wasn't about dominating someone, but about not being dominated by yourself." The last round. Mike Tyson, at 58 years old, received an unexpected invitation, a documentary about fighters who had changed their lives. The director wanted him to reconnect with people from his past, coaches, sparring partners, even the reporter who had asked him the question about Bruce Lee decades earlier. Tyson hesitated. But something pulled him back to that gym in Hong Kong. On the day of the recording, the reporter, now graying, with shaking hands, was there. "Do you still think you would have won?" he asked, his voice less provocative, almost shy. Tyson looked at the cameras, then at the ground. "I don't know. But today I would fight differently. Not to prove anything. Just to see what happens." The director asked him to talk about the lesson he had learned. Tyson took a deep breath. "Bruce showed me that fighting isn't the ring. It's what you carry into it. I carried anger my whole life. And when I stopped fighting, I realized that the anger was still there. But now it had nowhere else to go." He paused. "We don't overcome anger. We learn not to let it overcome us." The reporter nodded, as if he finally understood. "And what do you do with her now?" Tyson smiled, for the first time without bitterness. "I'll let her rest." Epilogue: The Empty Ring. Years later, Raphael, now a respected coach, received an envelope with no return address. Inside, an old photo and a letter. For the fighter who understood before he broke, Bruce Lee said that combat is a mirror. Tyson learned this late. Early. Don't let your students repeat their mistakes. Teach them to fight without needing to win. And when you think you already know everything, remember, the ring is never empty. There is always someone watching. Signed, a fan. Raphael kept the letter. That night, as he closed the dojo, he looked at the mat and imagined two men, one who only knew how to win, the other who only wanted to teach, finally holding hands, in peace. And then, the light turned off. The last round. Raphael's dojo smelled of old sweat and worn leather, but also of something new, the smell of fresh chalk on the gloves of the younger students, the muffled sound of bare feet on the mat, the murmur of voices that didn't yet know the weight of a punch. He watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, the scar above his eyebrow, a permanent reminder, shining in the yellow light. There were days when he still felt the ghost of Tyson on his shoulder, whispering, "You failed." They always fail. But now, when he closed his eyes, it wasn't the ring he saw, nor the blood, nor the fall. It was silence afterwards. The moment when Tyson, kneeling in the locker room, finally stopped shaking. The moment Raphael realized that the fight wasn't about winning, but about knowing when to stop. Sensei. The voice of Lucia, one of the most promising students, took him out of his thoughts. She held a pair of torn gloves, the knuckles red. "I can't hit the bag properly. It hurts." Raphael took the gloves and examined the tear in the leather. "You're holding the wrong fist." He adjusted her fingers, guiding them to the correct position. "It's not strength, it's precision. Like a scalpel, not a hammer." Lucia frowned, but tried again. The sound of the impact was cleaner this time. "Better," he said. "But you're still tense. Breathe." She obeyed, and the next punch was almost perfect. Raphael smiled. That was what gave meaning to everything, not in the champions he created, but in the mistakes he prevented them from making. In the knees that didn't need to be broken, in the ribs that didn't need to be broken. In rings that didn't need to be stained with blood to prove something. 2 months later, the envelope arrived. There was no return address, just the postmark of a small town in the countryside. Raphael recognized the photo before he even opened the letter. It was him, at 20 years old, in the gym locker room where he had fought Tyson for the first time. His face was swollen, his eyes were almost closed, but there was something about the way he was holding the towel, as if he still believed he could get up. The letter said what I already knew. He read it 3 times, then put it in his desk drawer, among the diplomas and photos of students who had moved on. I didn't need proof that Tyson was at peace. He had already felt this the day the old fighter, for the first time, extended his hand to him without irony, without challenge. You won, kid. Now you get to live with it. And he had lived. That night, Raphael closed the dojo later than usual. The students had already left, and the silence was so thick that I could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lamp. He turned off the lights, one by one, until only the one in the training room remained. The tatami gleamed under the dim light, like a dark mirror. He knelt in the center, touched the surface with his palm. Cold. Firm. I tried, he murmured, as if Tyson were still there, as if the ring was still full. I taught them not to repeat mistakes. Fighting without needing to win. Nothing responded. Just the echo of his own voice, faint, almost inaudible. Raphael got up, turned off the last light and left. Outside, the city was breathing. Cars passed, voices mingled, life went on, as it always had, even when he thought everything had stopped. He put his hands in his pockets and walked home, taking his time. The ring was never empty. But sometimes it was nice to forget anyone was watching. The last round. Raphael walked through the dark streets with the same pace as someone who had already walked that route 1,000 times. The city, indifferently, continued its rhythm, crowded bars, loud laughter, impatient horns. He didn't mind. I had already learned that the silence inside the head was noisier than any crowd. He arrived at the small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building, where the elevator never worked and the walls held the smell of decades-old food. He took the keys out of his pocket, but hesitated before turning them in the lock. On the other side of the door, he knew he would find the same thing as always, the dining table with a pile of unpaid bills, the worn-out sofa where he slept when tiredness took over before reaching the bedroom, and, on the dresser, the framed photo of Tyson, smiling with his belt raised, his eyes shining in a way that Raphael would never see on anyone else again. Entered. The air was still, as if the house was also holding its breath. You took your time. The voice came from the corner of the room, low, almost a whisper. Raphael wasn't scared. I was already waiting for her. Lucia was sitting in the armchair, her knees drawn up against her chest, her dark hair falling over her shoulders like a curtain. She didn't look at him. His fingers played with the edge of an old notebook with a cracked leather cover. I said I didn't want to see you here anymore, Raphael said, taking off his coat and hanging it on the hanger. And I said you're not the boss of me, she replied, finally looking up. They were green, intense, like Tyson's. But where her brother's burned with fire, hers burned with ice. Raphael sighed and approached. He took the notebook from her hands without asking. Lucia couldn't resist. Are you still reading this? It's the only way to remember him without you getting in the way, she said dryly. The notebook was Tyson's diary. Raphael had found it years ago, hidden among his brother's things, and had never had the courage to read it. Lucia, on the other hand, devoured him as if words could bring Tyson back. He wouldn't want that, Raphael muttered, leafing through the yellowed pages. Loose sentences, scribbles of fighting strategies, drawings of faces he didn't recognize. And, in the middle, a note that made your chest tighten. Raphael thinks I don't see it, but I see it. He holds the world with both hands and pretends it's not breaking. One day, he'll let it all go. And then, who's going to hold it back? Lucia snatched the notebook back. He knew. Tyson always knew. Did you know what? That you were going to fail. Raphael recoiled as if he had been punched. Not because of the accusation, he already asked himself that every day, but because of the certainty in her voice. Lucia was no longer the girl who cried in the corners of the gym, cheering for her brother. Now, it was someone who looked at him and saw only what was left, a man who had promised to protect Tyson's legacy and instead buried it with him. I didn't fail him, Raphael said, more to himself than to her. No? Lucia stood up, the notebook clutched to her chest. Then why are your students rotting in jail? Why is the gym closed? Why do you spend your nights alone, talking to a ghost? Raphael didn't respond. There was no answer. Lucia walked past him, her shoulders rigid. Tyson trusted you. And you let him die. The door slammed behind her. The gym had been closed for months, but Raphael still had the key. He entered the dark, feeling around until he found the switch. The cold light of the fluorescent lights revealed the place as it was now, a skeleton of what it once was. The peeling walls, the torn sandbags, the central ring with loose ropes, as if someone had given up on fixing it. He climbed onto the stage and sat in the corner, leaning his head against the ropes. He closed his eyes. I taught them not to repeat mistakes. To fight without needing to win. But they had won. And lost. And in the end, it didn't matter. The first punch came without warning. Raphael barely had time to raise his arms before the second hit him in the leg, sending him against the ropes. The taste of blood filled his mouth. He blinked, trying to focus, and saw 3 figures in the ring, all with their fists raised. You shouldn't be here, he growled, spitting blood onto the floor. You shouldn't have abandoned us, replied one of them, the tallest one, with a scar above his eyebrow. Diego. The first student Raphael had trained after Tyson's death. The other 2 advanced. Raphael recognized the faces, Marco, with his nose broken so many times it looked like a battle map, and Vitor, the youngest, who still had his eyes filled with an anger that Raphael could no longer feel. We trust you, Vitor said, his voice shaking. And you threw us away. Raphael didn't defend himself when the next punch hit him in the stomach. He doubled over, coughing, but didn't fall. I didn't throw anyone away, he managed to say. You chose the wrong path. No, Diego replied, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt and pulling him close. You taught us how to fight. And then he left us to fight alone. Raphael closed his eyes. I could smell sweat, blood, disappointment. It was the same smell as the day Tyson died. I couldn't save you, he finally admitted. Then why did you try? Because Tyson had asked. Because someone had to do it. Because, for a while, he believed he could. Raphael didn't respond. Instead, he slowly stood up, facing the 3 of them. If you want to hit me, hit me. But don't wait for me to fall. They hesitated. Marco dropped his fists first. Then Vitor. Finally, Diego, who released Raphael with a push. You're not worth it, he said, jumping out of the ring. The others followed, leaving Raphael alone again. The next morning, Raphael woke up to the sound of hammering. He got up from the couch, where he had fallen asleep after returning from the gym, and went to the window. Down below, on the sidewalk, a group of people were working. He recognized some faces, former students, neighbors, even the owner of the grocery store on the corner. In their midst, Lucia held a wooden sign with the words Tyson Gym hand-painted on it. Raphael ran down the stairs. What are you doing? Lucia didn't look at him. Fixing what you broke. I didn't ask for this. No one asked, she said, finally facing him. But Tyson asked you. And you didn't listen. Raphael opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Because, for the first time in years, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't anger. It was hope. The gym reopened a week later. It wasn't the same. The walls still had marks, the ring still creaked, and the smell of old sweat would never completely go away. But the lights were on. The ropes stretched. And, in the corner, a new photo, Tyson, smiling, with his belt raised, as if to say now yes. Raphael was in the center of the ring when the first students arrived. Some were new. Others, old acquaintances, like Diego, Marco and Vitor, who entered with bandaged wrists and defiant looks. He didn't say anything. He just waved them up. Lucia stood at the door, watching. When Raphael looked at her, she nodded, once. It was enough. The first punch was thrown. Then another. And another. And this time, Raphael wasn't alone.